Now, I'm sure the past couple classes you got tired of me just repeating myself over and over again about entrepreneurs. But this is a very important thing that we often leave out, or that people often leave out when they're talking about economics or trying to understand what's going on with a certain product. There was a recent article in the Wall Street Journal. Now, the Wall Street Journal, of any newspaper, is supposed to be the one that understands this stuff, was complaining about how the United States, heralded as a land of plenty, still doesn't have enough paper towels. There's an actual quote from the article. The problem with this quote is that it highlights the confusion that a lot of people have with economics. They just imagine that all the goods are already produced, and the only question is how to distribute it. There's very little attention that most people pay to entrepreneurial activity and the production process. So even that phrase, the land of plenty, assumes that all these goods are in existence. Like there were paper towels sitting in warehouses ready to go, ready to be distributed to people across the country who wanted to buy them. But they actually have to be produced and distributed. They weren't just sitting there. People actually had to go into work and make them. So this idea I talked about of markets spontaneously creating from individuals, acting in their own self-interest, trying to make themselves better, being willing to trade with each other without a system being designed. It may sound really good, but I'm sure a lot of you are thinking, is there any evidence of this, or is this just philosophical BS? Well, there's one example from the past where we saw markets spontaneously form. Um, R.A. Radford was a young economist who was fighting in World War II, and he spent about the second half of the war in an Axis prison camp. And he described how market institutions were created by individuals in the camp. Not an idea that they had, hey, let's recreate this, let's do this. It was them just spontaneously just trying to trade with each other. Slowly, these institutions formed. So what he said is market institutions were universal and they're spontaneous. They were a response to immediate needs. Another quote he had was, through the prisoner's economic activity, the exchange of goods and services, his standard of material comfort is considerably enhanced. The prisoners were given a certain amount of rations, and they were able to trade those rations with each other. No one prevented them from doing that. And through this trade with each other back and forth, they were able to make themselves better off. They were able to meet their needs better than if they just stuck with what they were given. Radford describes a process. At first, trade began very simply as someone trading one type of food for another type of food or food for cigarettes. What would happen, where they got these rations from, is the Red Cross would drop off little things of food for all the prisoners in the Axis camps so that they were able to, to be fed and survive through the war. Originally, it's just random barter between individuals. Someone who doesn't like coffee trades that coffee for chocolate. Started out very small like that. But over time, it began to grow, and cigarettes ended up becoming the currency of the camp. So all the prices of goods were listed in how many cigarettes it cost to purchase that. Now, as trade became more regular, it wasn't just one person doing it like here and there. It was like transactions going on every day. Prices began to develop. He said it was realized that a tin of jam was worth 1 pound of margarine plus something else, that a cigarette issue was worth several chocolate issues. Now, they started out in like a small camp, and then they were marched to a main camp. And by the time they got to the main camp, which took them a couple weeks, by this point, all the prices were set in cigarettes. When they got to the main camp, each bungalow that housed a certain number of prisoners had goods offered and like they had offers of goods they had for sale, and then they had advertisements for goods they wanted and all the price listed. So this is like a 1940s version of Craigslist. This is a super old way that they were trying to bring buyers and sellers together. So another thing to mention that is very important from this real world experiment is the market came into spontaneous operation. That, again, it wasn't a top-down decision being made by someone to start a market and to set these prices. And the resources were given by the Red Cross. These rations were given by the Red Cross. They weren't being produced by the individuals stuck in the POW camp. So this is irreconcilable with the labor theory of value, which I mentioned earlier. There was no cost of production whatsoever. Under the labor theory of value, you would think in this camp that trade would be impossible because there would be no value inherent in any of these goods because they were being freely given. So the economy shouldn't have been able to function if you were working with the labor theory of value. There were no capitalists, there was no bourgeois class to exploit the proletariat or the working class. We see the structures that Karl Marx described not existing in this basic experiment that was run. Now, eventually, there was even a small labor market of people willing to perform services, which they would obviously charge for cigarettes or for other goods. As the market advanced, it became just cigarettes because, again, that was the currency. And there were even entrepreneurs that existed. So there were a coffee shop that they built chairs for and tables so you could like sit there and drink coffee at a cafe, and you would obviously go there and pay them in cigarettes to enjoy that. One of the shops that they had overextended themselves. They would borrow from people, from other prisoners in the camp, and then like slowly pay them back, like you like own stock in this this little coffee shop. They're paying you like regular dividends. Unfortunately, it got overextended and ended up going bankrupt. So we see these market institutions naturally forming in a remarkably short amount of time. And now we're done with the introduction and overview of economics, and now we're going to dig into the textbook. So now we're going to start with Chapter 3. We're just going to discuss where prices come from, and we're going to break down the rules of supply and demand. So here's a basic chapter outline of how we're going to go through this chapter. We'll start out with the demand side of the market, talk about the law of demand and all the different things related to demand. Then we'll switch over and look at the supply side of the market. The next section will be market equilibrium, so we'll put together supply and demand. And then in the final section, we'll look at the effect of supply and demand shifts on equilibrium. So we'll start moving the curves around and seeing what happens based off of how things are changing in the economy. Well, all the sections in this chapter are important. The fourth section, the effect of supply and demand shifts on equilibrium, might be the most applicable to the real world. So we can really begin to do some analysis with this. Here's an example of a headline from not too long ago. When the supply of drugs run low, drug prices mysteriously rise, data shows. By the end of the chapter, hopefully this won't be so surprising for you. We understand what supply and demand mean and what shifts in those curves mean for the market for a certain good. So what is it that determines the price of a given good or service? The textbook likes to use the example of smartwatches, so we'll work with that for now. The demand for smartwatches. This is the consumer side of the market. So how many smartwatches do consumers want to buy? Now obviously it's going to be affected by the price of smartwatches. It's going to determine how much, or partially determine how much people are willing and able to spend for smartwatches and how many they're willing to consume. But it's also affected by other factors. So there's things like the prices of other goods. They're going to come in and help shape the price and the level of demand for smartwatches. Now the supply of smartwatches, this deals with how many smartwatches producers are willing to sell, how many they're willing to produce and then bring to the market. This is going to be affected by the price of smartwatches, but it's also going to be affected by other prices. And again, this includes the price of other goods, and there's several other things, several other factors that are going to go into this. And we'll explore this more in depth. Here are the very basic ideas that we're going to be talking about in this chapter. The big takeaways. For consumers, they're going to buy more at a lower price, and they're going to buy less at a higher price. Now, hopefully this is very intuitive for you. Conversely, producers are going to sell more at a higher price. They'll be able to recoup, the cost of actually producing. And they're going to sell less at a lower price. Now, these ideas, they may seem very simple, very basic, but these are going to have widespread implications, and we're going to build on these throughout much of the rest of the course. So now we'll start with the demand side of the market. In this section, we'll be able to list and describe the variables that influence demand. So we're going to begin our analysis where prices come from by investigating how buyers behave. We'll start with buyers, and then we'll move on to sellers. So we refer to the buyer's behavior, what the consumers want to do, their side of the market, as the market demand. So the market demand, the definition is the demand by all the consumers of a given good or service. So it's the total demand in the marketplace. Now, consumers don't have a fixed or an objective need. These needs are constantly changing, as we talked about earlier. And it's dependent on things like price, dependent on other goods, and a whole host of other variables that influence demand. Now let's look at a demand schedule and then how to put together a demand curve. Now, demand schedule is just a table that shows the relationship between the price of a product and the quantity of a product demanded. So the figure on the left here is the demand schedule. So this is for smartwatches, which is the example running through this chapter. The price of the smartwatch at $450, there will be 3 million smartwatches being sold per week. Now at $400, there will be 4 million smartwatches being demanded by consumers per week. At $350, it will rise to 5 million. $300 will rise to 6 million. And if you drop the price all the way down to $250, consumers will demand 7 million smartwatches per week. So then on the graph, we have this on the figure on the right. We can actually graph the demand curve. So this is a graphical representation in a curve that shows the relationship between the price of a product and the quantity of the product demanded. And you notice as the price goes from $450 to $400, just like in the demand schedule, the quantity demanded is increasing. Now this demand curve is being drawn as a line. The demand curve can take any shape. It can be bent. It can be rounded off. But we're going to work with a straight demand curve for now because it's the simplest way to do it, and you'll understand everything you'll need to know without adding in any extra difficult information. Now, when drawing the demand curve, we assume the Latin phrase ceteris paribus. What ceteris paribus means is all else equal. So when you're looking at the relationship between two variables and you want to try to analyze that, in this case, price and quantity demanded, we're going to hold all other variables constant, or all else equal. So if we're moving, say, from $450 to $400 for the price, and we want to see how it increases, so the quantity demanded will increase from 3 million to 4 million, we're assuming that every other variable that could affect the price or the quantity is being held equal. Everything else not explicitly being talked about here is being held equal, is not changing whatsoever. This way, it makes the analysis a lot easier, so we can understand what's going on with price and quantity, because that's all we're concerned about here. So the quantity demanded is the amount of a good or a service that a consumer is willing and able to purchase at a given price. The law of demand, this is the main rule we're learning in this section, is that if you hold everything else constant, when the price of a product falls, the quantity demanded of that product will increase. And when the price of a product rises, the quantity demanded of that product will decrease. Now this is an inverse relationship, so we're going to end up with a downward slope for a demand curve. So when one rises, the other one's going to fall. Okay, so the law of demand, it seems simple, it seems intuitive, but what's going on here? What's the explanation behind it? So there's two main effects. There's the substitution effect and the income effect. So the substitution effect is a change in the quantity demanded of a good that results from the change in price. So it makes the good more or less expensive relative to other goods that are substitutes. So if you want to buy, instead of a smartwatch, say you want to buy a smartphone, or say you want to buy a regular watch, as the price changes, the relative price of those other goods are going to change. So say the price of a smartwatch decreases, you can now afford more smartwatches relative to those other goods, to the regular cell phone or the regular watch. Now there's also an income effect. And this is a change in the quantity demanded that results from a change in the goods price on the consumer's purchasing power. So if the price of a smartwatch drops and you want to buy a smartwatch, you have more money left over at the end of the day. So it's as if your income has increased because you have this extra money. So it affects not just the relative cost compared to other goods, but also you feel as if you have more money. Now these both occur simultaneously, and it's not like we can tease out the effect that each of those, of the substitution effect and the income effect, on the change in the quantity demanded, but these are the two basic things going on when the price of a good changes. Now this brings us to an implication of the law of demand that's a little bit counterintuitive, so I want to go over this briefly. It's called the Algernon effect, named after two economists who discovered this back in the 60s. So let's say you have two goods in the same category, so the same type of good. Um, that used cigarettes back in this is like the 1960s. So if you increase the cost of both, let's say, high quality cigarettes and low quality cigarettes by a fixed amount, the consumption will shift to the higher cost good and the higher quality good. So let's look at cigarettes. We'll say it's this is California in the 1960s. They decided to put a $1 tax per pack of cigarettes. So with no tax, low quality cigarettes cost $1 a pack, and high quality cigarettes cost $3 a pack. So the opportunity cost of purchasing a high quality pack of cigarettes is 3 low quality packs of cigarettes. Because for that $3 that it takes to buy one high quality pack of cigarettes, you can get 3 packs of low quality cigarettes. Now, after the tax, the price of low quality cigarettes has increased to $2, and the price of high quality cigarettes is increased to $4. Now the opportunity cost for the high quality cigarettes is only going to be 2 low quality cigarettes, because now it costs that $4 that it costs to get 1 pack of high quality cigarettes. You can use that to only buy 2 packs of low quality cigarettes. So now, in order to get a pack of high quality cigarettes, you have to give up fewer packs of low quality cigarettes. Because of this, more people are going to end up buying the high quality cigarettes. Even though the price is more expensive than before, you have to give up fewer cigarettes in order to get that. And this puzzled economists when they first found it, because obviously your first thought is, well, if it's more expensive, now they're going to try to save money. More people are going to buy the cheaper cigarettes. But in fact, the exact opposite happens because of the opportunity cost. Now, this brings us to shifting the demand curve. Before we talked about all else being equal, but in the real world, all else isn't equal. And sometimes things are going to shift the demand curve. Things are going to change, other variables besides the price. We're going to end here for this lecture, and we'll begin with this next time in class, so I can go over, first of all, your questions about the law of demand, and then so we can really dig into this where you guys are able to ask questions of me, and we can talk through what's going on in person. With that, thanks for watching. Have a great weekend.